question number 4, is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? Where does the evidence point? Follow the science, guys. Follow the science. Now, when a crime is committed, we have to piece things back together with evidence to find out who did it. Then the jury decides, based on the evidence, who is guilty. In this case, you and I are the jury, and we get to decide in this case. But here's the problem, guys. So many times, people actually don't look at the evidence, and they throw the case out before they've actually honestly looked at it. So some of the evidence is very powerful and very early. I'm going to present a list, and then we're going to go back through it and explain it. So first, creeds started within days or months of the actual event, the event being the resurrection. All the books were written before 70 AD, all of the books of the New Testament. They were written with many eyewitnesses still alive. And again, we're going to go back through all of these points. The disciples were willing to die for the resurrection. Archaeology always supports biblical claims. Ancient sources who hated Christianity confirm its reports. Now, back to it. The earliest creed comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 6. Yes, this is in the Bible, but this is a creed that was written very, very early. It says, "For I delivered to you first of all that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he was seen by Cephas," that's Peter, "then by the 12, the disciples. After that, he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present." So most scholars would date 1 Corinthians, it's a book in the Bible, to being written around 50 AD or the mid-50s, about 20 years after Jesus had died on the cross. Now, this creed, as Paul said, he's referring to, it was an earlier writing. He is giving you guys something that he had heard. Where did Paul learn this writing? Well, Galatians, another book in the New Testament, helps us see where he actually learned it. See, in Galatians, it says that Paul had spent time with Peter and James in Jerusalem. And most scholars actually date that time to around 36 to 38 AD. Probably when Paul would have learned this creed, putting the creed to being written days, weeks, or at most a couple of years after Jesus' resurrection. So it's not a ton of time. It's not this, some people get into, it's hundreds of years after they came up with it. No. Weeks, months. We can remember facts pretty easily for that kind of time. And so then they came up with these creeds because, why did they come up with creeds? Because most people were illiterate in that day. And so they did oral resuscitation. They shared the news orally, but they wanted it to be the same and not the telephone game. So then they memorized with creeds, which are basically like a chant with a rhythm. So you get all of the same words so everybody knows the truth and the facts. Next, all of the books were written before 70 AD. In 70 AD, the Roman commander Titus, he destroyed Jerusalem after a 3-year siege, which actually means they were probably all written before 67 AD, actually. Any book or letter written after this most pivotal moment in the Christian or Judeo-Christian religion would have mentioned it in some way. Just like a letter or a book written about New York City for years after 9/11, it would have mentioned something about the World Trade Centers and this attack, unless it was written before 9/11. It just makes sense that the Bible, which covers events and people, during this time would have talked about the destruction of Jerusalem unless it was written prior to 70 or even 67 AD. This was written when eyewitnesses were still alive. Back to that creed in 1 Corinthians, it said, after that, he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present. So far, we have presented some interesting early evidence. But for the sake of time, we're going to stop here and pick up in the next video with some shocking, powerful evidence that would even convince a jury. So stay tuned.